Thank you for being here. I will try in the next 15 minutes to share the vision of the sixth digital exchange, but I think a vision that we all share on the future of finance, and try to convince you how much interoperability, but more importantly, the reuse of existing ISO standards, for example, can be beneficial for that realization of the future of finance. How do we see the future of capital markets at the sixth digital exchange? We believe that everything or anything of value, represented at the bottom, be it financial contracts such as equities or bonds, structured products, but also cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, currencies like Euro, Swiss franc, other types of valuable assets like collectibles, real estate investments. All of those assets of value will be tokenized on a myriad of, unfortunately, of private and public blockchain. But more importantly, on a global digital asset agnostic infrastructure. And every word is important in that description. A global 24/7 digital asset agnostic infrastructure powered by blockchain. So you could say, okay, if you are from the crypto world, this will be accessible to retail investors. Yes, effectively, it will be accessible directly for some of those products by retail investors in wallets as we know them today. But most likely, many of those retail investors will still want to rely on banks or financial institutions to connect them to those various services on blockchain. So they will still use a bank for custody of those assets. For convenience reasons, because the bank will be able to offer financing of services based on the assets they have. It's not going to be everybody has its assets in its wallet. It will be probably a mix of both. Like me today, I have a MetaMask with some assets in, I have other assets in service providers. And what's the role of an FMI, a financial market infrastructure in this world, like SIX and SDX? So SIX is the group, umbrella group of SDX. It's going to be to connect the financial market to those blockchains where services will be deployed. So first, as a way to transition from how we do business today to the way we will do business in the future, but also to be able to move existing assets who sometimes have a redemption year of 10 years, 20 years from now, into that world of blockchain through tokenization. It will also be and that's what we're currently already offering, both services, is giving access to banks and their customers to public chains where they can hold Bitcoin and ETH, for example. But also offering, why not, staking services like we're currently doing at SIX. It will also be about bridging, and that's where protocols like Chainlink will be very important, bridging between blockchains, private and public, being the regulated entity that can control how assets can move from one entity, one blockchain to another. What happens if something goes wrong, dispute resolution. Regulators will always want someone to call in those cases. I think we also will be doing the following. Deploying services directly, so DeFi services directly on chain. Today we have Aave, we have Uniswap, great services, and many others. They are very retail focused, and we think that FMIs, financial market infrastructure, have the potential to become the institutional Aave and institutional Uniswap of the future, where custody is pushed to the user of the asset and the owner of the asset, but services these assets can be used on are deployed by institutions that are regulated and that regulators can call if something goes wrong. So, beautiful future ahead. Of course, you have central banks involved. That's the black box there. Very important. This will not be possible without central bank digital currency, at least at institutional level. Today, every transactions between banks are settled in central bank money. And why? Because it's the less riskier asset out there. No counterparty risk, no issue. When you settle with CBDCs or central bank money, you have no risk at all. And that is something that we're currently implementing in our infrastructure with the Swiss National Bank, whereby transactions in the next 6 months, starting end of the year, will be settlable in wholesale CBDC. More on that to be announced in the future. So the customer view is about this way. So I have a wallet, or I have a set of wallets that I can use, like today in the public chain world, to connect to multiple services on multiple blockchains from one source of liquidity. I no longer have my liquidity all over the place in the world, in different banks, in different CSDs for institutional players. I have it all accessible from one place or one aggregated place, and I can connect to various services instantaneously and do business with it. But there are challenges around that. So many challenges. So legacy tech is clearly one. So today the world of institutional banking and capital market works on systems that sometimes are 40 years old, COBOL-based, and these serves the bank well today, but they need to evolve into something that is 24/7 and that is blockchain-based. That's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of fragmentation in asset, platform, and regulation, meaning that today the assets are in silos. Cash settles in an RTGS system, security settles at a CSD. Those two connect somewhat to do a DVP process, but it's all aggregate, it's all siloed. The promise of blockchain is to put all those assets of value, if you remember my introduction, on the same infrastructure. This is revolutionary, but a lot of things need to change for that to happen. Regulation is very asset-based. So you have a regulation for money, you have a regulation for securities. Those needs to converge and evolve into something more like function-based regulation or risk-based regulation without a digital asset agnostic-based regulation. That's not there yet. Fragmentation, of course, of platforms. Banks are issuing on their tokenization islands, as I tend to say them, They are accessible to their customer base, but not to other banks' customers. So how do we solve that? Standardization as well is a key feature. We have some standardization, but we're not there yet. So we see two ways of interoperate in this financial world. We believe that banks will be connecting to FMIs to make their assets available to other banks' customers, and that's what we currently are doing at SDX, is connecting multiple blockchains through a immobilization and reissuance of assets on our setup. It's not necessarily the best model in the sense that it's not scalable forever, but at this stage, for the next couple of years, it will be something that will be very useful to start having assets move out of their islands into a more acceptable setup where everybody can reach those assets and everybody can buy those assets. We also interoperate with traditional finance. So what we've built is a bridge with the traditional systems, which means that anything we issue natively on blockchain, being a bond or private share, can be also traded on the traditional infrastructure. And anything that is on the traditional infrastructure can be tokenized and made available on future DeFi services that we will build. And that's important because, as I said, most of the assets are not on blockchain. Most of the assets are in the traditional world. And we need this migration path, this transition path towards, in order to not fragment liquidity and make those assets available to all the players they need to be accessible to. Of course, there is the Swift Chainlink experimentation that you've heard about earlier in the week, so yesterday. This is quite important as well. We need technical solutions to bridge those blockchains, and I'm not going to cover that too much because you know what Chainlink is doing. They're doing a great job at interconnecting blockchains, at moving data around through oracles, and these are the type of solutions that the industry needs, not only in the crypto space, but also in the traditional space to interoperate in the future. What I want to spend the last 5 minutes on is existing standards. So you're probably familiar with the ISO organization, the International Standardization Organization. It's a multilateral organization that is in Switzerland, where I live. Lots of those organizations have foundations in Switzerland. And ISO builds standards. It builds standards about the size of a table. It builds standards about the size of a container on a boat. They build standards. And they also build financial standards. And the biggest one in this space is the ISO 20022 standards. You don't need to remember the number. All you need to remember is that it's a asset-agnostic business model and data definition standard. So it defines financial terms. It tells you what a settlement date is, what a trade date is, how a transaction, how a payment takes place organically, how a DVP process takes place, what should be announced during a corporate actions for a fixed income instrument. So all this is defined in a language that everybody understands around the world. All banks are using those standards to communicate with one another, today on the SWIFT network via messages, but it is technology agnostic as well. So it means that you can implement ISO 222 as a data definition layer for any implementation. That's what we've done at SDX for our blockchain implementation. It's ISO 222 based at the data definition layer. Very important. Important for interoperability with the existing infrastructure, but also important because you don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's there. It's all perfectly defined for the last 15 years. And it's actually also being built, being reused in the crypto industry to create messaging requirements. I don't know who is familiar with the IVMS 101 standard in the room. It's the requirements to send beneficiary and ordering customer information between virtual asset service provider as part of the anti-money laundering requirements of FATF. Well, this IVMS message has been based on ISO 222. So we can reuse that methodology and that data standards to do our own things in the blockchain world. Another standard that is important to remember is 24165. Again, no need to remember the number, but it's a digital token identifier standard. I convened the group who created that standard. It's a standard that uniquely identifies any token on blockchain, be it Bitcoin or a securities or whatever. It's unique, so it creates a uniqueness of identification of an instrument, let's say, on blockchain. And it also gives a technical fingerprint to it, meaning that you know that this instrument is on this specific blockchain, was created on this specific block at this specific date in the past, and so on and so forth. And here's a smart contract linked to that specific token, for example. That's critical because as we, the financial industry, starts issuing assets on blockchain, we might issue them on 1, 2, or 3 blockchains. And we need to have a specific identifier for each. Why? Because you cannot confuse the 3. You need to be able to report to the regulator that this asset is available on the Ethereum blockchain, on the Stellar blockchain, on the Tezos blockchain. And you need to do that in an unambiguous way. That's why the standard was created. And it's also being actually bought in by regulator in the sense that they like the idea and they are promoting it in the context of MiCA in Europe, for example. Another standard, so apologies for all those numbers, ISO 17442. So that's the legal entity identifier. You're probably familiar with it. It's a standard that is used for those who are in financial industry as a way to identify legal entities in reporting to the regulators, but not only, just as a way to identify specific entities to deal with. Very useful for KYC, very useful for pre-checks of transactions. Who am I dealing with? Who am I talking to? Who am I working with? And what they've done recently is a VLEI, so a verifiable LEI with verifiable credentials, meaning that not only you can use the LEI identifier to know this is bank A, this is financial institutions S, this is corporate customer Z, but you can also identify individuals in that specific bank or corporate who are allowed to sign transactions, who are allowed to sign reports, who are allowed to connect to the blockchain. Why not? So the universal identification and verifiable credential could be that standard. It's free standard, or pretty much free. It's cost recovery based, and it's functioning. It's managed by also a foundation in Switzerland. And last but not least, 27 seconds. To conclude, there are many other standards, and ISO standards in particular, that you are already using without knowing, probably, or can be used in the future. So currency codes, you know, USD, EUR, CHF, like Swiss franc. This is an ISO standard. It's the 4217. Country code on website, .us, .be, or country codes in general when you're traveling around. This is also an ISO standard, the ISO 3166. So you see there are many, many existing standards, very powerful standards that have powered economies and finance for many years in the past and can continue to power the world in the future. We just need to reuse them in our industry, blockchain industry, and they are mostly generally available for free. So come and have a try and use it. So thank you. This is all I had to say today. I'm out of time. The journey will belong to this future that we're all building together, but the direction of travel is clear. Interoperability, standardization, global digital asset agnostic infrastructure. Thank you.